Hello all you crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games. Welcome back to 3D games in GameMaker. So last time, I talked about rendering the depth of fragments to a surface rather than the actual diffuse color information. I'm not going to show what that looks like right now because I don't want anyone's eyes to bleed any more than they already did the last time around. This video is going to be covering something very similar. This time, instead of rendering the depth of a fragment to a surface, we're going to render its normals instead. Rendering normals to surfaces, like rendering depth to a surface, is something that you have to do on occasion when you're doing 3D games. And I believe I actually did allude to this a while ago when I made the Toon Shader outline video earlier this year, about a year ago. Right now I'm going to go a little bit more in-depth on it though. So this is what the 3D scene looks like with just the color information, with the actual diffuse color information. We have a couple spheres, we have a pirate ship, very nice. So I'm going to start with something that looks more or less like the depth rendering shader. I'm going to call this, instead of shader depth, let's call it shader normal. I did myself Control D to duplicate the depth shader, so we're going to be starting out with something that looks a lot like what we were doing last time. If you have not seen that last video, you probably want to do that. Get yourself caught up. If I were to go and set the... Okay, I already did that. If I were to go and set the normal shader when we draw the world, I guess I will run this, just to have it on record for this video. Brace yourselves. Yeah, okay, that's rendering depth to a surface. So an overview of how this works, we calculate the depth of each vertex in the vertex shader using glPosition.z over glPosition.w, and we pass that to the fragment shader with a varying. That will interpolate it over every fragment that is drawn on each triangle, and then we do a little bit of math and magic to encode that single floating point value as a color. When it comes to normals, we're going to do something very similar. So instead of saying varying float v underscore distance to camera, let me say varying vec3 v underscore normal. And instead of assigning glPosition.z over glPosition.w to that varying, I'm going to say v underscore normal is going to be equal to an expression. We can have it look something like something, but not exactly like this. This can be gm underscore matrices, matrix world, and we're going to multiply that by a vector 4 containing the input normal, if you want that xyz, and a homogeneous coordinate of 0. Oops. If you've made it this far on your adventures in 3D and GameMaker, you've probably done things like this countless times in the past. This is just transforming the input normal into world space, and then we are passing the world space normal to the fragment shader. In the fragment shader, when we encoded depth as color, I wrote a little function that was called toDepthColor, and that took the varying and converted it to a vector. I believe that was a vector 3, red, green, and blue, no alpha. And here, when we do normals, it's going to be very much the same. I'm going to get rid of all this and start over. Let me define a function that is a vector 3. Let's call this 2 normal color. And this can take an input vec3 normal. And let us call that function in the fragment shader's main function instead of the old one, and let us pass in the normal varying. So if I were to just simply return normal without doing anything to it, this would actually look semi-presentable, and this would not look totally weird. What's wrong here? Oh, okay. This expression is a vector 4. This needs to be this expression .xyz, because the varying that we created is a vec 3, and we only really care about the xyz components of that vector. Okay. So this isn't going to look totally stupid the way that just encoding depth to a color does. So if you were to observe the world with the normals rendered to a color just as is without any modification happening to them, you can see that we have some interesting effects. And you can if you look closely, you can see what's going on. So the faces that are sort of coming out of the front of the pirate ship, coming out of the front of the Going Merry, are reddish. And if you think about what this entails, the surface normals of all these faces have a value in world space of something in the realm of 1, 0, 0. And if you convert that, 1 on the x, 0 on the y, 0 on the z, if you convert that straight to a color, you're going to have something that looks like red. Or red-ish. Or depending on exactly how it's oriented, it might be magenta, or it might be orange coming out of the side. And the same is true for the other axes. So we have something coming out of the, what is this? This is the right side of the ship. The axis coming out of the right side of the ship is green for very much the same reason. The axis coming out of these, for example, the floor and the up-facing surfaces on the ship are blue, again, for the same reason. If you look at the spheres, you have something that looks like a color picker in a painting program. That's kind of neat. But you could also, you can see that on the, like the right-facing, the outward-facing, and the up-facing sides of the spheres, you have red, green, and blue. And on the back, you have 0, because, again, if you were to extend the mental image, the normals coming out of, for example, this side of the sphere, of the surface normals, are going to be something in the realm of -1, 0, 0, or maybe 0, -1, 0. And that doesn't have any meaning when converted to a color. It just gets bottomed out at 0. And accommodating for that is fairly easy. You may have already figured out what we're going to do here. So the range of each component of a normal is -1 to +1, assuming that it has a unit length of 1, as it should because it's a normal. Whereas the range of each of the components for a color value are 0 to +1. So all we really need to do is shift the range of this normal from the range of -1 to +1 to the range of 0 to 1. We can do that first by multiplying by 0.5 or dividing by 2.0 if you prefer. So when we cut it in half, the range of each of the components of a normal is going to be from -0.5 to +0.5 rather than what it was before. And if we want to move that to a range of 0 to 1, we can simply add another 0.5. And with that, we're done. Rendering depth to a surface isn't complicated per se, but rendering normals to a surface is definitely quite a bit less work. So if I were to run the game now, we will have something that may look somewhat familiar to some of you, and that is we have a somewhat warmer picture of the scene. We don't have any hard reds or greens or blues or anything like that, but we also don't have any just black colors on, for example, the opposite sides of objects. If you've ever seen a normal map for a texture for a fancy 3D game, you've probably seen a color scheme somewhat like this. And if you were to repeat the little exercise that I did the last time, you could see it where these colors come from. The normals pointing out of the this side, the front-facing side of the Going Merry. The normals of all of these surfaces in world space is still something in the realm of 1, 0, 0. But after we've done this little operation and converted those normals to a color value, restricting the range from 0 to 1 rather than -1 to +1, the colors that have been outputted for each of these surfaces is something more akin to 1, 0.5, 0.5. And the result of that is a much lighter red than we had before. If you were to go the other way, instead of all these surfaces having a surface normal of something like -1, 0, 0, we now have 0.5.5. So instead of just being a black abyss, we have actual color here. And any information that a normal with a negative range contained was not lost. Okay, very nice. I do like the color scheme that you typically get from rendering normals like this. Like, it's not something that would probably ever be super useful in an actual game, but it is aesthetically pleasing. Anyway, let me get out of there. If you want to reverse this, when we reverse the depth calculation, that was a bit of an ordeal, using a dot product and some fancy magic numbers. But reversing the process of converting a normal to a color is quite a bit easier. This is a much simpler function to reverse than we had before. We can just say vec3 from normal color, vec3 color, and we can do an equal and opposite operation to what we did the first time. We can return normal minus 0.5, let me wrap this in parentheses, multiplied by 2.0. Okay, that's a function inverse. That's like basic algebra. So again, I'm not going to demonstrate any uses for this today. I will in the future, or at least I plan on doing it in the future. I just wanted to cover this now because it is very similar to rendering depth to a surface, to a texture. And I did want to cover this while it's still fresh on both my minds and the minds of people who may be subscribed to our watching this. You can think of all these things as tools that you may add to your 3D tool belt. And honestly, my main goal for this 3D and GameMaker series thing is just to cover as many possible tools as I realistically can. Before I go, a few notes. There are other things that you may wish to encode to a surface like this. You may wish, if you're using a deferred renderer, common things that you would want to render to a surface may include depth. It may include normals. It may include the actual position of objects in the world. You might want to render information on things like specular reflection. That's getting into the more 3D materials, deferred rendering side of things. I'm not going to go over that now. Those are a little bit more involved. It's just worth pointing out that they exist. Also, when you do things like that, it is pretty common that you will want to render the depth information of a scene and the normal information of a scene and the position information of a scene and other things at the same time. And in cases like that, instead of having multiple shaders that do exactly one thing and having to draw the entire scene multiple times with different shaders, it is generally much easier, much less work, much more efficient to write one shader that takes care of all of these things and to output multiple render targets. I have made videos on multiple render targets in the past. If you are interested in this sort of thing, you may well be interested in the video on multiple render targets if you aren't already familiar. So, let me stop. Let me commit these changes to GitHub Desktop. If you want the code for this, it is pretty simple. But all the same, look for the link to the repository down in the video description. I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, so if you're interested in seeing videos on the more weird parts of GameMaker, fancy 3D graphics and whatnot, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute towards these videos being made, there will be links to that in all the usual places. You could see your name in the credits, hear yourself shouted out at the end, you could see a preview of my future plans, that kind of thing. I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. I'm just going to run the game and leave this on the screen at the end of the video because I think it's really satisfying. Why is this? Oh. Right. Special thanks to Edward Holt, Emily Koyo, Gunnar Clovis, Poshar, Sindra Larson, Squarecrow, Tusk, and Zenjamin for supporting these videos. If you want to see your name in the credits or hear yourself shouted out at the end like this, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.